Wow, I cannot believe how lame that spell is. What a waste of paper and garbage. I will take Fireball instead and not waste my time with such a pansy spell. Animal Messenger, who cares about that?
Oh dear YouTube gurus of dungeon mastering, please help me. My game is broken because a player keeps casting a spell that's ruining my Dungeons and Dragons world.
Listen, folks, you may not have been expecting this kind of vanilla ice cream from my channel, but I've decided to mix things up a little bit, and so this is going to be Game Changers, which is perhaps a regularly occurring sort of episode here on the channel where I'm going to talk about force multipliers in role-playing games. Now, this isn't just restricted to the Dungeons & Dragons genre where spells unlock unique capabilities. In the supers genre, it could be unique power sets, or drugs that allow powers to be transferred between supers or suppressed entirely. In a Traveler universe, it could be something like the Jump Torpedo, which some folks used as sort of an end around against the speed of information limits and the fact that there was no faster-than-light radio in Traveler. But another example of a great force multiplier and game changer in the sci-fi genre is Star Trek's Transporter. That's pretty meaningful change to how the world of Star Trek works. You know what? The rest of Star Trek completely acknowledges it, and it's not a problem, and it doesn't break the universe. Just like these spells in D&D won't break your game if you think things through a little bit. And as a player, you can really have a big impact if you think about how these spells can impact the world, and offer your services to NPCs with that in mind. There are all sorts of little gimmicks and MacGuffins and ideas that can come in from unique capabilities, often devices, in other genres. And it may be worthy of bearing in mind that these technological analogies are something that you may want to use as you analyze the impact of these spells in a high fantasy genre. Because Dungeons & Dragons is mostly high fantasy. The people in the world that you're playing in know about magic. Even minor warlords and bandit leaders probably know about magic spells. How can I protect myself against this problem that may happen when a wizard comes along? How could I solve this problem that I'm having by perhaps hiring a player character to give me that ability to send an animal messenger across the wilds to a faraway castle? Yeah, that's right. That useless spell may be the MacGuffin that pulls an adventuring party into a complex political web. That's the sort of world building that's unlocked as you acknowledge the high part of high fantasy that magic brings to your game, and these game changers do. Your game's not going to be broken by these spells because the world acknowledges that they exist, and they have for a very long time. So in this episode, we're going to cover a couple of low-level cleric spells, a couple of cantrips, and one medium power-level wizard spell before we get into the real heavy hitters in a future episode. So, if you're up for it, let's strap in for Game Changers. To start out, let's underwhelm you with a couple of spells, one of which is famous because of an Underdark race. Dancing Lights is a cantrip. For a lot of its time in history, it was something that every drow could cast at will. And with it came the idea that drow could speak, and they had a sort of sign language that they could perform through the use of their dancing lights to convey information. Now, that's an example of high fantasy. An entire race has this ability, and the fantasy has worked its way into the fiction, the reality. As a player character, not only can you use this ability to speak in code if you work out some sort of code book with your teammates and possibly other people within the world, the interesting thing is that you can also use dancing lights to look around corners. No, not your vision, but by casting shadows. As you send a dancing light beyond an obstacle, you could then use the light's emission point to cast shadows on a wall that you can see. Imagine someone behind a low wall that you then light up from underneath to perceive their shadow. Now, of course, they're going to be a little bit alarmed because that means that they have been discovered. It's a way to tell someone that you know where they're hiding and that they better move or you're coming for them. It's scary for a monster who likes to lurk in a dark place to be lit up in this fashion. Minor illusion is something pretty simplistic. I mean, after all, it is the sort of thing like, am I holding a cup or am I not holding a cup? Am I holding a cup or am I not holding a cup? But notice that there were some things about that particular cup. I could use minor illusions to share an image of a person, composite sketches of fugitives that you're looking for, or maps of a battle plan that you communicate to NPCs. If you have a bird's eye view from your familiar, then you can then share that same bird's eye view with others if you have the talent to be able to channel those images into illusions. And to carry things forward when it comes to looking around corners and obstacles, one of the things you can do is cast a minor illusion on a shared point of vision between you and an unseen target. And that could be a piece of bait. That could be something like a footprint, a tasty morsel, or just something entertaining. They could even suspect that it is an illusion, but they need to approach it closely and kind of maybe want to get close to it in order to figure that out. And from that point, you could spring a trap. You could even put an area of effect spell like Grease or another fairly effective low-level spell on the point where the minor illusion is to bait someone into that place. Regardless if someone's out of line of sight or if you are hiding or invisible, you can use minor illusion in order to effectively get them into a trap and thus attack them while maintaining your invisibility. And yes, invisibility is going to be the final spell that we cover here in this video. Hey, I have a question. Why do you think the game is called Dungeons and Dragons? Well, here's a thought. Maybe it's because with the spell Message, which is after all a cantrip, at least for bards, it's possible to exchange messages with someone who's in a dungeon, like literally behind a wall. You can transmit information into and out of a castle. This is an incredible power as far as spying, and this means that anyone with that kind of spellcasting ability is probably going to be a little bit suspect when it comes to making a new hire. This also means that there might be a lot more information security culture in these high fantasy worlds than you might anticipate otherwise, because people are going to be using codes, they're going to be having locked file cabinets, they may even exchange written messages rather than verbal ones, because if a spy is in their camp, they can get that information out a whole lot quicker and a whole lot more discreetly than they can really in almost any other setting. The cloak and dagger sort of business that your character can get into and really do some real secret agent kind of stuff, even at first level, is not only an opportunity for adventure, but it's something to think about when you're doing your world building as a game master. Next, let's talk about a couple of low-level but high utility in those edge cases where they can come up divine spells. Divine spells are unique because really any spellcaster of the appropriate class can pull them out of the book when they really need to. And this means that they're going to be part of the world building. It's not like no one's ever discovered this spell or very few people have had it in their spell book. It's player characters can pull these spells out of a hat at any time. Then it stands to reason that NPCs and the player characters of yesteryear, the sort of heroes that you read about in the books, have also had these spells pretty much at their disposal. When it comes to Zone of Truth, a really important thing to remember is that the justice system may be built around this. And it also means that if you maintain your innocence and you can't answer a question, then it might be that people start to wonder, well, maybe he really doesn't know anything. And that's something to think about. And it also means that high charisma individuals and their Machiavellian ability to make saves and slip out of the spell might be held in a little bit lower social regard in spite of their charisma as they are here in our world. People know about those tricksters that can break their way out of these spells and bring legal proceedings against them to a halt and drag out trials for weeks and months. Those guys are a real pain in the butt. Or maybe they're just lovable tricksters. It's something to keep in mind when it comes to the world building. It could be that amoral but charismatic individuals might actually be really cool people in the world building that you're going to conduct. It's a thing to think about. And as a player character, it's a thing to be prepared for. And when it comes to this world building, how are you going to use Zone of Truth? What does it mean to your character's morality? Unfortunately, one too many times I have seen Zone of Truth be tied up with really icky advanced interrogation practices that make me want to walk away from the table as a game master because it's just not the sort of thing that I'm ready for when I'm playing a light Dungeons and Dragons game. Now, this also means that if you're lawful good, do you believe that that's okay to do? And do you think your party mates are going to share your thinking on that topic? Everybody knows about Zone of Truth in a Dungeons and Dragons world. And I think everybody has thought about what it would be like to be under the effect of that spell if they were innocent. So put yourselves in the shoes of the defendant before you start going off the handle with this spell. Oof, sorry to get a little bit grim with that. The point is to ask yourself questions. Now let's ask the question about Animal Messenger. How could something as simple as whispering to an owl change things in a world? Well, the speed of information is going to change really meaningfully. This is a low-level spell, and it's really pretty readily available, and especially for the sort of fantasy species that have a lot of druids, you know? And I mean by that gnomes and elves, because if you are spotted on the threshold of the elf kingdom and one druid is able to send a message to the capital, then it's not going to be very long before the king himself has something to say about you making your way to the ruins of Myth Draenor. I hope we'll go back there sometime in the long chronicle of hardback 5th edition adventures. In any case, it's still there for us to go back to in the vintage editions. A great dungeon, a lost magical elven city. Yeah, and the elves know you're poking around in it. Before we get to the big daddy of the bunch, which is of course invisibility and how it affects worlds and how we can use it in a lot of ways beyond what you might have thought of, let's talk about fog cloud. Yeah, it's ninja smoke basically, but in a world where fog cloud is a readily available low-level spell, maybe people look at fog with a lot more suspicion and worry. It could even be that the relatively underpowered spell of Gust of Wind, which is a counterpart to the sorts of things like this, might be slightly more valued just because you can rule out the possibility that anybody's in that fog cloud. Gaseous Form is a higher level ability which kind of shares a lot in common with it. For that matter, Cloud Kill. Yeah, fog is dangerous, guys. Fog, you gotta watch out for fog. Yeah, fog will kill you. And I think that that's what the worlds that Dungeons and Dragons abides in really internalize. I think that good world building knows that fog cloud is a thing. And with that in mind, casting fog cloud might just be scary enough to put someone on edge, even if you're not ready for a combat. They might be ready to get out of here rather than stand their ground just because a fog cloud is looming over there. Think about it. So finally, let's come to Invisibility. This is a spell which has been around since the beginning of Dungeons & Dragons. It is deeply a part of this game, and the usual means that it's used have a lot to do with the way that the ring is used in The Hobbit and in The Lord of the Rings. You can avoid combat, you can sneak past enemies, you can do all manner of things like that. But let's talk about the countermeasures. Let's talk about suspicions. Let's talk about even something as weird and strange as voyeurism. And by that I mean, if invisibility is a known thing in this world, relatively medium-level spellcasters, really low-level spellcasters even, can get access to it, then how do you know that you're really alone? It could be that a standard kind of social practice when everyone's ready to divulge a secret or share a private moment with someone is that you might dust the room with powder or some other means of kind of flushing out someone who's lurking in a closet. Now, I don't mean that paranoia is deeply seated in all of these high fantasy worlds, but things are really lurking as often as not. Sometimes it's your player character lurking. So from your invisible blind, as you overhear the villain monologuing in his tent, be ready for when he says, It's time to dust the room for shadows. Oh, here's another idea when it comes to invisibility. Since most level 3 wizards that are working a day-to-day job and not going to war probably memorize invisibility, since it's the sort of thing that can keep them alive and get a lot of work done with their arcane abilities, it might also stand to reason that a lot of things that they would protect for themselves would be hidden behind light beams. Yeah, I'm talking about the sort of security system or trap which we all have programmed into our memories, remembering the prominence of Catherine Zeta-Jones' hindquarters evading those light beams in a film too long ago to recall. And if lasers are a little bit too technological or magical for your imagining, it could simply be that guard beasts, which don't have a great sense of smell, might protect treasures. Now, the reason to put this down through your mind is to think about how rogues probably have heard about this kind of trap or security system. They may have non-magical means of working through how to disarm these traps using mirrors and the like. And fog clouds. So there you go, folks. It's all about world building. It's about acknowledging how all of the magic in these high fantasy worlds is acknowledged by each other. Don't get me wrong, it's not like magic isn't a sense of wonderment in these worlds. It's not so hackneyed as me staring at my phone waiting for my brakes to get fixed. And for my part, one of the reasons why I feel like spells are not so cliche in these worlds of D&D, and even as these are things that people can cast on a day-to-day basis, is because of the Vancian spell system. You have to pay an opportunity cost, and sometimes you have to plan ahead in order to use these abilities. On the flip side of the coin, if you can anticipate how you can get gainful employment for these spells, if you can anticipate how these spells might fill out your day-to-day schedule, then it could mean that a lot of NPC wizards are not waiting around a corner ready to cast Fireball, because they've got better things to do with their magic. It's important to world build, which is to say that in the worlds of high fantasy, magic is something that people think about. Magic is something that people think ahead for. Magic is something that people have memories of in their lives. It's not just old wives' tales in a high fantasy world. Keep that in mind as you witness the world through the eyes of a player character, as you roleplay through the eyes of NPCs and player characters, and as you world build the history and the forthcoming adventures in your own D&D games. Now, I think in the future, I'd like to talk to you about some game changers outside of Vancian spellcasting. If you'd like to see that video, if you'd like to see a video devoted to the vagaries of invisibility unto itself, and other complex games topics, then I would love it if you would subscribe here and help the reach of this channel grow so that we can talk about games in this way with more folks. I hope that you're having a great holiday season, and for now, I am Antoine, sometimes known as the French Chemist, and here on YouTube as the Complex Games Apologist.